right, we'll go ahead and move on to the next one, but I appreciate it, Tim. That's a lot of, especially being a kind of a one-man band here in the Midwest. I'm mostly extension, actually I'm all extension now with Ohio State University, but I'm one of less than 3 FTEs that understand aquaculture, and that is in extension in the entire Midwest. So I'm always trying to think of ways to extend my time. So when it comes to stuff like this, it's going to take forever for me to get to pond-based systems in the Midwest and just some of the normal, just no matter what species, because even Ohio alone, we sell over 23 different species. You're never going to build this for every single one, but some stuff that kind of transcends is always in the back of my mind to extend my capabilities a little bit further. So they will be nowhere near as fancy as that, but one day we'll get to that same sort of stuff in the Midwest as well. But this one's, so this talk here is going to talk, and actually I am going to discuss something called Co-op Mastery that's also through Ohio State University, which gets into some of the same stuff, but that's particular for cooperatives, but it's the same sort of programming that you just talked about, except for it's going to be educating. The first one, just like y'all, it's built for large cooperatives, but it's built for all of the workers. Now they're being asked to go back and develop these co-op mastery programs for the higher level folks. Exactly same stuff that you had. Initially it was for the people on the ground, and then it's like, all right, great, now what about my board of directors? They need training as well, because a lot of people come on and they're still not sure what all is going on with a cooperative and what the cooperative business model looks like. So this one, I changed the title a little bit just to make it a little bit more interesting, but Cooperating to Enhance Aquatic Farming, Aquatic Animal Farming in Ohio and the Midwest. Of course, I'm the program director at OSU for Aquaculture Extension, but really this doesn't mean a whole lot without Hannah Scott, who runs our team of within the College of Food, Ag, Environmental Science at OSU, particularly the Center for Cooperatives, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So I am more of the fish biologist, and Hannah's more of the cooperative person. So if you have co-op specific questions, I don't know. I'll direct you to Hannah, because not real sure, other than the basic stuff that we all should know what a co-op is. It's a form of business owned and controlled by the people who use its services. So those who benefit are, of course, going to be, or those who run and those who benefit are, of course, going to be the members. This is not anything new in agriculture, and it's not anything new in aquaculture. We've got a lot of aquaculture cooperatives that have came, and some have gone in the United States over the last couple decades. Small print that Hannah put in here, but basically membership owned. The members own and invest in the business. They're providing equity into the cooperative, and then those earnings, and it's earnings, not profits, but the earnings from that cooperative go back to the members. As far as the control, it's governed, of course, by the board of directors. That's going to be elected from the membership. They're going to vote on the issues, and it's going to be a one-member, one-vote principle. And then, of course, the benefits. We already talked about the mutual need. We already talked about the earnings going back to the cooperative and really being dependent upon how much they are using the cooperative. And then there's a whole bunch of benefits that are, of course, included in here, including market access, reduced costs, access to quality services, political action, community improvement. For the most part, this second bullet point is what we're going to get onto, and is what the Aquaculture Cooperative in Ohio is really focusing on right now. But you'll hear all about that in a few minutes. The Center for Cooperatives mission that just started up within the last couple of years to extend knowledge and technical assistance to emerging and existing cooperatives in Ohio and beyond through teaching, research, and extension. So they are helping new and beginner cooperatives and some established, but more so new and beginner cooperatives just get off the ground. That's their entire job, is to work with folks. So Hannah Scott and her group is working with us on aquaculture, but they've already came up with a pumpkin cooperative that's doing really well, actually supplying some, really because they've been able to aggregate their product. They're supplying some very large customers now, thanks to helping develop that business model, or the cooperative business model with this whole center, which is really cool. And of course they've started, I don't remember the name of it, but it's a Southwest beef cattle cooperative as well, getting their product. And it's really just, those two are both marketing cooperatives and being able to aggregate enough product to move out. But once again, we're going to focus on reducing costs for our farmers in this one. education, they do counseling, they do member education, bylaw development, board training, feasibility studies, basically anything you could possibly need help for as far as the Center for Cooperatives. And so I spend the first few slides on this because I wouldn't be here, the farmers wouldn't be where they're at, and we wouldn't actually have a formal cooperative if it wasn't for these folks really really pulling back on the reins, because we get in the room without Hannah or one of those folks and we just go 90-0, and we're all going off in a bunch of different directions. So they really kind of pull us back and actually kind of keep us on track. So a quick background history of the aquaculture cooperatives in Ohio. So first one, I'm really only going to talk about one because it's the only one to really talk about. There's one, and it's small print, I'm sorry, but it's not really the first formal or formal-ish cooperative in Northeast Ohio. It's a little bit more of an informal cooperative, so they're not actually registered together. They're not actually registered as a cooperative. It's just an understanding that feed's expensive, shipping's expensive, and if I'm not buying a full semi-load at a time, shipping is really, really expensive. So all the folks in the Northeast just buy their feed together to drop that shipping cost. Just said that. The feed that they're actually buying is specifically, it's actually funded by USDA NIFA, but they just call it a NICRAC diet. It's specifically made for centrarchids, bluegill, and bass, and it's still being used, and it's actually Mellick Feeds over in Pennsylvania who's producing their feed right now. And it is mostly those pond producers or those centrarchid farmers, almost entirely largemouth bass and bluegill farmers. So why Ohio and why aquaculture for this sort of stuff? It's because we've got a small but active aquaculture industry. We're one of only 2 states in the Midwest that showed positive growth between the last 2 censuses of aquaculture. And the next census comes out supposedly December 22nd, and I think we'll see some more added growth. It's particularly in Ohio, but hopefully other states as well. We're selling over 23 different species, so it can be the same species, but depending on the age, you might go through 6-7 different feed formulations, or just micrometer size or millimeter size. So there's it's a whole host of problems. It's not just one species and 2 feeds that you have to deal with. Every species has its own preferred protein and lipid concentration that we have to go through and worry about, as well as, of course, just different feed manufacturers. And some farmers are just really set on only buying from one feed manufacturer. We've got a lot of multi-generational farms, so we've got some 2nd and 3rd generations, but mostly it's a lot of newer farms, and we've had a little over 60 farms that actually reported to the last census, but I do think we've got a little bit more than that. One of the difficult things is that we all know if you try to shove a farm indoors, it becomes very capital intensive, and so anything we can do to help drop the cost of production for the farmers, of course, is going to be welcomed. And then it's very species dependent, but anywhere between 30 and 50% of your variable costs on your farm are going to be feed. So that's a huge chunk. So if you can drop those costs, of course, we want to see it happen. And as I mentioned, most production, even though we do have folks wanting to go indoors, we still have a significant amount of production in ponds. Timeline of events, I'll get more in depth over the next few slides, but here's just an overview of back in January 2017. Hannah and her team led something called Intro to Cooperatives Workshop prior to the Ohio Aquaculture Association's annual conference. And Tony was there, and we certainly appreciate his support and the Ohio Department of Agriculture support. It wasn't until December we had the Central Ohio follow-up meeting and had about 45 folks. So basically the first meeting was, here's what cooperatives are all about. Are you interested in talking more about what an aquaculture cooperative could look like? A bunch of people, of course, said yes, so we had a follow-up meeting. And then for the next year, we just, really in that December meeting, the Center for Cooperatives said, great, your folks are here, now I need some of you to be part of a steering committee meeting, or a steering committee, so that we can actually get on track. And so for basically all of 2018 was a bunch of in-person meetings, a couple of conference calls, but mostly in-person meetings, talking about what a cooperative would look like, and then of course you got to work through all the kinks that go along with it. And then one thing I want to point out is in July, the Center for Cooperatives, so Hannah and I, went up to the Northeast Ohio part of the state, and did a workshop with those folks to really bring them up to speed as far as what this other cooperative, because I mentioned they kind of have an informal cooperative, but we are, but this is going to be something separate but inclusive, and certainly be open to them if they want to be a part of it. But I'll get to that more in a few minutes. And then, of course, late December, we had some more meetings, which is where a lot of stuff really got to. And then January, they had a display booth at the Ohio Aquaculture Association conference. So they actually had, along with all the other vendors, they had a booth set up with banners and business cards, and you can actually go ahead and apply for membership and everything. So it actually looked the part. It wasn't just something on paper or something that people were whispering about. They were actually there and willing to take your questions. And then February, I missed this meeting because I was in Ames, but they had their inaugural meeting for their members, and then on the 27th, so 2 Saturdays from now, we'll do the second scheduled meeting for the actual members. And in between all of this, there's lots and lots of emails. And I stress it later, but I stress it now too. There's really 3 farmers that have kind of led the way in this as part of the steering committee, and really they've been a part of the steering committee since the beginning. And of course, they're not being paid for any of this, so they're all doing this on their own time because they see real value in something like a cooperative and what it could do for themselves, but also what it could do for just aquaculture in the state of Ohio and Midwest. So I certainly appreciate them. So we just talked about, there's that January 2017 meeting that Center for Cooperatives led. That sign-up sheet at the end of that January meeting was really what was utilized for that December meeting. And then over 50 folks at that larger meeting, so there were 100 or so, and about half decided they were a little bit more interested to figure out if that could be beneficial for them. And then due to scheduling conflicts, I mentioned January not having another meeting till December. Of course, farmers are just busy farming, but all 3 of those who really are leading the charge, his name is Matt Brem with Brem's Perch Farm. His perch farm's been running for 19 years, but he's also a nurse full-time. Ashton Chen does saltwater shrimp just east of Columbus. He's also a biochemical engineer during the day, so he's doing this on the side as well. And then the other guy, he's an indoor tilapia farmer, but they run an apple orchard and do a lot of agritourism the rest of the year as well. So times get busy. We have very few farmers who are doing this 100% full time. Most folks have 2, 3, 4 gigs, and that's just the way it works. So with that December meeting, they asked for a steering committee to be developed. They, of course, had to stay and talk about the logistics. The committee started out with that perch pond farmer I just discussed, the apple orchard guy, the engineer, someone who was just interested in local foods, which we want to incorporate farmers who are farming as well as some other folks as well. So they were interested in local foods. We actually had an out-of-state urban aquaponics farmer, so doing the plants and the fish together. He was interested, so he joined the steering committee. We just had an interested entrepreneur. Aquaculture's weird. We get people from all walks of life that want to be a part of this, so we certainly welcome them in as well. Actually, another saltwater startup farmer, and then we had an ag seed consultant who's really interested in aquaculture processing, and so he's going to be really beneficial in the future, not so much for the feed aspect, but when we start talking about eventually, hopefully, marketing together. We hope this is a place we can run our products through, because processing is extremely limited, really throughout all the Midwest, but Ohio as well. The committee very quickly dropped to just 3 farmers because nobody wanted to even show up, because it does take a lot of commitment and they're not being paid for it. Bunch of round tables we discussed about. The December meeting really helped us steer what the steering committee focused on for all of 2018. And so what we did is have a bunch of round tables with those 45, 50 people. We had about 6 facilitators, myself included. And basically I would sit at this table with 5 other farmers and say, okay, if you had a cooperative that focused on anything that would benefit your farm, what are some of the things that you think would be extremely beneficial on? Because we don't want to dictate anything. We want to find out what the masses are interested in. lowering the cost of feed and supplies, by far the most interesting one, or the one that came out the most. Joint marketing is a huge aspect for those farmers, as well as another one or two folks wanted to talk about product drop-off points. We all aggregate our product to one location and move it on out, but we don't have those elevators, and we're probably not going to for a while. So really, logistically, the low-hanging fruit, simply we buy feed together, shipping cost goes down. That's an easy thing to really justify and go after. So that's one of the main things they're going to focus on. In addition to this December meeting to help steering folks together, we actually had Ashton, who does the saltwater shrimp in Ohio. He actually sent out a survey, Google survey, I think is what it was, but sending it to all of the farmers, and I think he sent some hard copies as well. Before this cooperative ever even got started, I think he just wanted to know for his own knowledge, since he's still kind of new into the game, to figure out what the needs were, and feed purchasing and lowering the cost of feed, particularly with shipping, was one of the things that they really focused on or pointed out in the surveys and some of the results that came out. I mentioned the Northeast Ohio workshop, in particular earlier, that happened in July, and I mentioned the background of them buying together. And one of the reasons we really do is because we want these folks to understand that this cooperative is not the Ohio Aquaculture Association cooperative. It's just called the Ohio Aquaculture Cooperative, although it's also inclusive of other states. Really because Hannah and I wanted to go up there, and I don't know if you can tell, but we've got a buggy right here, and this little cord right here runs outside to a generator, a gas generator, and we're running our little PowerPoint here because the Northeast Ohio is the Plain community. That's our Amish and Mennonites who they're buying their feed together, but they don't necessarily talk to a lot of folks outside of their group. But there's a significant amount of feed bought together, and we really just wanted them to realize that not many of them are part of the Ohio Aquaculture Cooperative or the Ohio Aquaculture Association. So we just wanted to let them know that this is an inclusive group of everybody. This is not an OAA group. This is just, we're going to buy feed together. If you want to be a part of it, you're certainly welcome to. The progress was really slow in 2018, partially because farmers were farming and getting their own stuff going together. But I also mentioned about November or December that really it was October, November, that, hey, coming up January 2019, again, is the OAA's annual conference, because that's always when we have it. And you've been talking about an aquaculture cooperative for 2 years. Either get something on paper and start taking applications, or just stop talking about this, because people are going to start to assume it's never going to happen, and they're going to lose any and all faith that they ever had in your cooperative. And so what we wanted to do is formally, and I say we, it's these 3 farmers that are leading it. I just get to sit around and chat with them, but we wanted them to formally incorporate, iron out the logistics, including cost to be a member. Drop-off points is a huge thing. Ohio's a fairly big state. A lot of folks may only buy 1 or 2 pallets, and they may pay more in shipping, but it'll come right to their farm. So how do you convince them to just go to another farm and pick up from another place, even though it costs them a little bit more money? What feed mills are they actually going to purchase from? And then what are some other supply companies that they can also include in this? They also had to determine an approximate cost benefit for their interested producers, which they've somewhat done. They've got some preliminary stuff in an Excel spreadsheet that they sent to the masses, and they do have that application form. And really, it means nothing if they don't know how to get to you and being able to find some information. So they've created websites, emails, Facebooks, that sort of stuff to make sure that if you're interested, it's very, very easy to reach them. As far as the current status, they've got 5 members currently and at least 4 more verbally, which for them just to be getting going right off the bat, I am extremely happy with. If we had 50 immediately, we would be overwhelmed and nothing would get done, because that's just too many people to handle at one time. Right now, they're doing just a very modest $400 one time just to buy in and to become a member. And we got to understand that feed margins are very small, so we need these very large producers, which does make it difficult because some producers are already buying a whole semi-load, so they're not necessarily going to be really benefiting. But you got to have those large quantities really for that co-op to really be able to get anything out of it, so any money saved, or I'm sorry, any surplus can be pushed back to those farmers. So one of the ways, and I get to it down, but first thing I want to point out is we understand that things like salt, we do have a lot of saltwater shrimp farmers in the Midwest that are trying to start up. Salt's very expensive. You buy salt in decent quantities, that's something you can have a little bit higher, not necessarily of a profit margins, because profits don't exist in co-ops, but a little bit more surplus. So we start with feed and the understanding that there's a lot of supplies that could be purchased as well, which bought in bulk could really lower that cost as well. Another thing to stress, once again, we don't have that hired labor right now, so these farmers are doing it all themselves. I get a lot of emails at 12 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, because these folks are working entirely too much, but they're getting it done. And then come April, that April 27th meeting, they're going to elect those board members and approve the bylaws that have already been drafted up. I certainly suspect that those 3 farmers will be elected to at least serve as the initial board members to get things going on, which is not uncommon at all. And then this week, they'll submit their first feed order to Ziegler Feeds for their first semi-load, and it'll be delivered a couple weeks after that. So I mentioned the website, the email, and the social media stuff. Their website's actually ohioaquacoop.weebly.com. Right now, it was a part of a farmer's website before they actually were able to go through and make their own. But the label, the website, the logo, everything looks really good. And I think this is certainly important, not only from a if this was just total crap, quite honestly, no one would take it seriously. But it looks, the Weebly's kind of weird to add on because that's the host side, of course, that's powering this. But the website's very clean. It looks very good. It tells you exactly what they're doing, and it helps them when they're trying to talk to folks like Ziegler or Purina or Pentair or any of these other groups. It's easy to Google these folks and find them quickly and see that it's something real. Members can actually sign up on there. You can contact. You can do everything. And it's great from a buying standpoint, but it'll be really nice when they eventually get into marketing things together. They've already are trying to create a label and create a brand and all that sort of stuff. So even though that's down the road, they're looking towards the future. So working together to feed tomorrow is right there on the front page when you go look at it. This is the home page. Down at the lower part of the home page, they tell you about what brands they're offering. I mentioned Ziegler Feeds out of Pennsylvania. That's what a lot of our folks use. Certainly not all. We probably buy from at least 6 different feed manufacturers. But Ziegler's a big one. Omega One's another company located in Ohio. YSI, which is where pretty much everybody buys a lot of their water quality supplies, particularly things like dissolved oxygen meters. We saw one in that in Merck Animals video earlier. The guy was checking the DO. That comes from YSI, and then of course Pentair, who's down in Florida, who offers a lot of the supplies. You go from the Home tab to the About tab. There's all stuff about what it is, which is very important. Not going to read it all to you. And then they talk about the services, when they're expecting to order their feeds, what their feed schedule is expected to be like, and exactly what needs to be done. Must be placed in payment received 7 days before the date. There's no ambiguity. It's very straightforward. You've got to follow these steps in order to be able to be a part of the co-op so that we can make sure that everyone gets the best price together. And then once again, my most important part is that there's contact information on there. There are physical addresses if you want to. If the Plain community wants to mail a hard copy or has questions, they can write it down and physically mail it to one of the farmers that's involved and that's on the steering committee. There's also that email address. There's also a phone number. And then there's an overall contact form. Very, very easy to get in touch with them if you have questions or if you want to join or whatever it may be. It's really, really hard to get folks to trust you if they can't even figure out really how to get in touch with you. They do social media, although they are not very active because they are just getting started. They send a lot more out and emails and updates at just regular aquaculture conferences. But they do have an Ohio Aquaculture Cooperative Facebook page as well. As far as the future, I certainly hope, and they hope as well, that they continue to expand and add more members, but only at a rate that they can actually keep up with. If they expand too fast, they're going to collapse, and they understand that. Look at grant opportunities to help them get going and get started up. One thing that's extremely difficult is they're all doing this pro bono. If they have some sort of assistant that helps get all the payments in, talk to the feed manufacturers about feed formulations, and just do all the nitty-gritty work that nobody has time to do, that certainly would help out. Work on additional feed manufacturers and suppliers, and we understand no one wants to be the first on the dance floor, so as we have a few successful truckloads come through, I'm sure we'll see some more folks joining in. Last thing I'll point out, I think this is the very last slide, but there is, if you want to learn more just about co-ops and you've got folks that would be interested in this, maybe not you, but somebody else, there's a website called go.osu.edu/co-op mastery. So they've created a workbook, and it's a cost recovery thing, but I was told if anybody wants one, I can sell you one. But Co-op Mastery Beyond Cooperatives 101, a very neat workbook that runs through everything we talked about, or everything Hannah has assisted us with, including the cooperative business model, which she trained us on, including governance, which she's trained us on, as well as things like legislation and how you go about all of that. So there's a bunch of free stuff available online. You can see it's posted on YouTube, but it's housed on YouTube, but runs to their website. But they've got training modules on here for people who are already a part of a cooperative. Maybe their business or the company they work for is a large cooperative. I think we had some yogurt earlier from an extremely large cooperative. Now they're going to be focusing on building these same workbooks and the same training modules for the boards of directors and for those that sit a little bit higher up because they need training as well. I'm done. I got to mention, though, that I was asked a couple weeks ago to come here and present. So I called up the Ohio Soybean Council. They, without batting an eyelash, funded my travel here so that I could present for you guys and report back to them. So all my travel runs through them, and right now I'm very, very heavily supported through the North Central Regional Aquaculture Center. So a lot of my time's dedicated to grants through them, which of course is run through USDA and NIFA. I'll answer questions if I can. If they're about the co-op business model, I'll send you to Hannah. Thank you.
What's the number one aquaculture species in Ohio in terms of tonnage and in terms of dollars?
Sure, I'd probably say the difficult thing is they're all quite similar. I'd probably say if we had to do overall tonnage, I wouldn't be surprised if it was largemouth bass, but once again, a lot of that is produced by my Amish farmers, and you just don't hear from them. So if I'd have to guess, it would probably, it's going to be a centrarchid most likely. But we still do. A lot of it is for food. Yeah, we do some for recreation, but we do a lot for food as well. We do very little of everything that kind of comes together as a decent amount when it's all put together, though. But with those 23 different species, that's a little bit of everything. And we have largemouth bass that are sold for 3 or 4 different markets. You know, it's the pond and lake management companies want those small largemouth bass that are 3 to 5 inches, if that, and that's for stocking into a pond that's going to be great fishing in your backyard 2 to 3 years from now. That same company will sell advanced largemouth bass that are 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 inches long, but that's someone who's not willing to wait 2 to 3 years for good fishing. They want good fishing now. And then when you get above 12 inches, that same exact species, of course, ends up into the food market live to the Asian markets in Toronto and New York City and Chicago, places like that as well. But yeah, that's probably one of the higher ones, as well as yellow perch being a big one too. Tilapia is really starting to come on in tonnage too.
What percentage cost benefit did you find putting together your order? I know your first one was just like
Yeah.
Can you kind of know where that percentage came out of aggregation?
I don't remember. Honestly, I don't remember exactly. They have what they call an Excel spreadsheet, but it's really like 10 little numbers. I mean, it's the most basic one you can possibly think of. And honestly, it also, your cost or your benefit really depends on that particular farmer and how many pallets he was buying. Because if he was already buying 3/4 of a truckload, his benefit is lower than if I was only buying 3 pallets at a time or 4 pallets at a time. And so what they did was break it down. If I'm remembering correctly, they broke it down by, if you bought 1/4 of a truck to half a truck, 3/4 of a truck, and kind of did it that way, as well as what feed you're actually buying as well. So maybe different proteins and stuff like that cuts down that cost as well. So, but off the top of my head, I don't remember what their cost or benefit is, and they're still trying to figure that out. Yes, sir.
Regarding your farming, how many farms over there and how many?
Yeah, I only have 2 in Ohio right now, but Indiana's got about, I don't know, they've got less than 10, but they're all the indoor biofloc shrimp guys. They're all small. They're all doing swimming pools, stuff like that. I mean, that's what everybody does in the Midwest. Our largest one probably has Ashton. I think he's got a couple facilities, and that's because he just recently bought more land and is expanding his operation, but he might have 15, 18 swimming pools or so, and I don't remember exactly what their diameter is, but they're at least 15 feet, I guess, in diameter. Yeah, they're all indoor. We do have freshwater prawn farmers, nowhere near as many as we used to, but we certainly still have prawn farmers that are going to be in ponds. Not many, and it's becoming even more difficult with struggle to access good PLs, or PLs period.
What was the reaction of the vendors, particularly the feed mills, to being contacted by a new cooperative?
Sure. So most of these farmers are already buying a lot of feed, so they, especially with Ziegler, they were completely on board because they know they've been buying feed forever, and so they have absolutely no problem with it whatsoever. But I think YSI, Omega, and Pentair, I think they contacted the cooperative. I don't even think it was the other way around. But I think Ziegler was in particular sought after because we know a lot of folks actually they buy from them anyways. So yeah, it wasn't hard at all.
Have you seen other cooperatives in the region?
I think we're one of the only ones in the region. I mean, Catfish Country's always had feed mills that were cooperatives. They've had processing plants that were cooperatives. Unfortunately, most of those have closed up shop, especially with increasing imports and kind of the downturn of the catfish industry. But that could be a bunch of reasons why they closed up, But that was a big one. But as far as I know, we're one of the only ones that have formed. And there's an Indiana farm and some Michigan farms as well. This is called the Ohio Aquaculture Cooperative, but we're open to anybody. So if it makes sense for an Indiana farm to be the last stop, and there's 2 farms through Ohio that ends in Indiana, they're not going to cut you off and say you can't be a part because you're not in that state. They don't care. That border means nothing.
So what would make aquaculture in Ohio really take off?
I would say, you want to say processing because we don't have any processing. We have 2 or 3 processors that are up around Lake Erie, but they only want to process wild caught. They don't want to capture. They don't want to deal with any aquaculture products. But also, we consistently hear that, particularly for the Pond and Lake Management Company, we just don't have many farmers that are growing, for example, a largemouth bass up to 6, 8, 10 inches. So most of those animals are starting in Arkansas, being hatched on really large Arkansas farms and shipped up when they're 2 to 3 inches. A lot of these companies want these 6, 8, 12-inch fish, 6, 8, 10-inch fish. That's way too expensive and way too unfeasible to ship from Arkansas. So I think we need some folks that are willing to process, but we also need some farmers that are willing to be a hatchery themselves and grow those animals up to a larger size too. So there's a lot of things that go there. I do think things like a feed cooperative that can cut the feed costs down will help as well. And you don't have to be a member of the cooperative to buy feed through the cooperative. You pay less than if you bought the feed by yourself, but you're going to pay more than if you were a cooperative member, which helps them in total buying and also increases the cost that the cooperative is going to retain. So at some point there will be non-members that switch over to members that are still buying through the cooperative either way. You just get charged a markup for not being a member.
So is the cooperative aggregating the order, or is this going to be a continuous order after that?
Now, one of the things that they're aggregating, and one of the things that folks like Ziegler say, and the reason why they're so happy to do this, is they don't have to worry about 20 invoices. If you have 20 farmers, you deal with one invoice, and it makes it so much easier for Ziegler. And if there's a problem, they got one point person as part of the cooperative to go talk to. And then on just the other way, you have one or a board of directors, but they all have a voice, a strong voice, which increases their buying power and just overall ability to mean something. That's why we have state aquaculture associations, national aquaculture associations. It means a lot better than Farmer John going and complaining to legislators compared to an association. So it's the same thing that's working within the cooperative as well, which I think is why Ziegler and the others are so happy to work with you. One invoice, one thing to worry about, makes it a lot easier on them.
Even if they take little less margin and start with it.
Yeah, which they've got that built into their business model anyways. They're not making a ton on the shipping anyways. They're
So your first one is, I know you're just starting, but it's just one order a year.
They're going to try at least for 3 full semi-loads a year to start off with, but the goal is to get as quickly as possible. Yeah, they're hoping that all of these are full semi-loads, but right now they're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4 a year. And part of this whole December, September-ish is not pond guys whatsoever. That you're hoping that the recirculating aquaculture system guys are picking up here, because my pond guys don't need feed during the winter because their fish have gone dormant.
Has your Amish guys come in yet, or they're just watching?
I've got a meeting this Saturday up there. So they have their own aquaculture association, separate from the Ohio Aquaculture Association, but they have done really nothing in the last few years, and so they're actually talking about dissolving. But what they want to do is they've got a few $1,000s still in their account. They're trying to figure out legally how they can take the money that they have saved, and those who were members, let them buy into the cooperative as a way to utilize those funds that were used. But there's very specific ways you can use that money as a nonprofit. And so they're trying to see, could they run it, which a co-op is a non-cooperative, or a non-profit, but could you run it and dissolve the association and move the money over there? But I think they will. Problem is they're already calling it the Ohio Aquaculture Association Cooperative, and I need them to stop calling it that, because a lot of them don't want anything to do with the OAA, because that, for a bunch of reasons, stuff that happened long before I ever got there.
Is that friend Bob Kalala?
He'll probably be one that gets into it eventually. He's not a member of the cooperative, he's not on the steering committee, but he may eventually, for sure.